such a nice introduction, and thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for being here for my lecture. It's my pleasure to be here, and I wonder if I could have a tiny bit of light here, just to see the keys. Oh no, I got it. No. All right. So I have quite a bit of images, so I'm going to start right away. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my background and my family as some of my first influences in my work and the way I think. So I'm going to start with my parents, which in a way are perfect for this exhibition. They were a woman of wonder and a man of steel, as you will see. So I'm going to start with my mom. My mom was a seamstress who used to work at home very hard. I used to help her delivering maquilas to downtown Mexico City. And she was one of my perhaps biggest inspirators or biggest examples of somebody who knows what's right or wrong, who had a deep sense of justice, without being political, without being in any political party, without being ideological. One day, and it perhaps is the most vivid memory I have, my mother arrived from a delivery in downtown, crying, sobbing, very upset, because she witnessed a police killing an 11-year-old kid in front of her. And she just arrived, hugged me, I cried with her. And ever since then, I've been trying to understand why people have to resolve conflict through violence when violence is not necessary. So this was back in 1968. That, as you might recall, was a very fateful year everywhere in the world. In Mexico City, there were demonstrations. And right here in Tlatelolco, the biggest massacre of that time, that year in Mexico took place. The October 2nd massacre of Tlatelolco. That was right before the Olympic Games, and the Mexican government wanted to make sure there was a peaceful city, and of course they did it in the most violent way with the army, and the tanks and helicopters arrived, and about 500 people got killed in just about an hour. People tried to hide in the buildings behind it, and the police, the soldiers were running after them, and then they also killed people who were living in the buildings. It was a very tragic moment. Right after that, there was no more demonstrations in Mexico for the next 3 years. And the Olympic Games were inaugurated successfuled. This is another shot of the same rally. It was a very peaceful rally, and it created a moment in the history of Mexico that nobody forgets. In spite of that, the Olympic Games still were a place for politics and protest, as you might recall in this case. The American athletes raising their fists. So anyway, I'm going to move to another influence in my background, my father. My father was an artist who never made a living as an artist. He worked as a firefighter at some point. As you could see here, he's the one on the front, on the far left, holding the hose. And he was very athletic at some point, you could see. That's a man of steel. It was a very scary father to have. You didn't want him to be upset with you, because a little spank and I will be in the other end of the room. But anyway, so at night he will be painting and drawing because he's what he wanted to do. And I used to bother him, asking him to draw things for me, like paint me an animal or a submarine or whatever, and he got tired of me. And he told me that I should do it myself, and he taught me how to do sketches and gave me color theory with colored pencils. And that was the best thing he did, because then after that I began to draw and I never stopped. So he was a good teacher for me. Also, another influence I have from my father is that he worked in the central bank as somebody who was catching. Eventually, he quit his job as a firefighter and got a job in internal security for the Banco de Mexico. The Banco de Mexico is the central bank or the mint, and they print the money and they cannot afford corruption there, so they have internal security. And my father arrested a lot of con artists, and his office was a museum of crime. So there were not only Mexican pesos being forged, and the plates and the money were next to each other. There were also dollar bills with the plate and the dollar, francs from France at the time, and anyway, so he in the one part of his time was painting, the other part of his time was arresting people, I guess. This is one of his artworks, painting over a photograph of my mom. That's her. He put a little too much red on the lips, anyway, but he did it with love, anyway. And this is a portrait of my father, done by a forger, a French artist who did a lot of forgeries in Mexico. He signed as San Pietro. That's the signature you could see. And after 10 years, the police could not find him. He did dollar bills and French money. And finally, his girlfriend that he left behind in France denounced him to the Mexican police. Big mistake that he did. He should have come with his girlfriend. But anyway, so she contacted the Mexican police. He got arrested, and then my father befriended him when he was in jail. My father brought to him art supplies and asked him, why did you do forgeries? You were trained in the best art schools in France, came from very wealthy families. You didn't need to do forgeries. And the guy said, well, I did it for the thrills. And I never forget that, because when I was in my father's office, just looking at the look-alike things left a deep impression. I was 10 years old maybe when I first saw it, and that left a big impression. And then seeing artists, like forger artists, doing incredible portraits like this one out of this is an India ink, and you don't even see the brushwork. Out of a passport photograph, it really left a big impression on me. So all of that is why I do a lot of lookalikes, which you're gonna see. Anyway, I grew up more later with, as was mentioned, I studied political economy. I went to study social sciences. Again, after 1968, I was very curious about society and the world. These are two of my best friends from the School of Anthropology. And with them, I went to demonstrations. And we went to the first demonstration after 1968, which was forbidden in June 10, the Corpus Christi demonstration. I don't know if you have seen the movie Roma, but the demonstration that takes place there is this demonstration. And at that time, there were about 70 people that got killed, or at least disappeared. We couldn't find them in the university next morning. And I had to run for my life in this demonstration. We were attacked by paramilitary groups that have sticks, with bamboo sticks, and this is something you didn't see in the movie, and it's not clear in this photograph, but some of the sticks have actually knives at the end of the stick. So they were super nasty. You could see some people on the street. I was very lucky to be alive. I ran over a big metallic fence that was closing, and I just flew like 10 feet up in the air like a cat and rolled underneath with one of my two friends. And the metallic curtain closed right behind us. And then we hear a lot of gunshots and people screaming. One of my friends stayed outside, but thankfully he survived too. So that left another big impression on me. And at the time I began to try to apply what I studied in social studies and economics, and took my first job before I worked in the countryside was working in a literacy campaign in Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl. And it was a literacy program for adult education. So I was the artistic director, and sometimes I wrote some articles about it, about different issues in the country or the world. And It was a beautiful experience I had. Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl is named after a king I'm going to talk about later. It's one of the poorest areas in the metropolitan area of Mexico, and the people who live there were taking over land, coming from the countryside, and trying to find jobs in Mexico. So anyway, so I did quite a few pieces of that, sometimes about workers' issues, and so on. But at the time I was doing abstractions. That's the funny thing. I was not even making political imagery outside. I had a studio. I used to study Russian constructivists because the Russian artists were very much involved in the Russian Revolution, and I was very curious about it. But also American artists inspired me, like Helen Frankenthaler, and this woodcut comes after admiring the work of Helen Frankenthaler. Anyways, to make the story short, I married an American in Mexico. Together we moved here because after working in the countryside, she got sick, she got parasites, she couldn't live in Mexico. So that's how I moved here. I either broke up with her or moved with her. So I moved here out of love. At the time, we're no longer married. I married again later. Life is too complicated, I guess. But I came here as a privileged person in a way. It was my choice to come here. I was not running out of anywhere or any place. If anything, I didn't emigrate. I was imported by my ex-wife. Anyway, so I'm gonna start with my work now. So I'm gonna start with the first wannabe forgeries that I did after seeing the etchings by one of my favorite artists from all times, Francisco Goya, from the Disasters of War. This is called Against the Common Good. And I was still a student at the San Francisco Art Institute studying printmaking, and we happened to have a history of printmaking class with Robert Johnson, was the curator of the Achenbach collection in San Francisco. And we saw in our hands original prints by Goya. And I felt I will never be able to afford these. I should learn how to do them in case I need the job like San Pietro. So I did my first forgery, kind of. This is Contra el Bien General, and Ronald Reagan declared himself to be a Contra, so it was perfect because I didn't change the original title of this print. Other sources, I grew up reading Mickey Mouse as well, but here I found this photograph of 1942 with a design for a gas mask for children during the Second World War. And if you Google that, I mean, they actually were done. I never seen one in person. I don't know if you could find they would be highly collectible. If not, still useful. Anyway, so this is another from the Disasters of War. And when you go to Disney World, you say, "Welcome to the happiest place on earth." And I decided to mix the happiest place on earth with the unhappiest place on earth. So that's my rendering, sort of like a yin and yang, and with the gas mask on the bottom. So you could see. Anyway, so I have a whole series of, I did a double forgery here with Picasso, with the Mademoiselle d'Avignon, and so on. So I have a ton of these images. So I'm gonna move kind of fast. These are two of my, Goya being introduced to Jose Guadalupe Posada, who's another of my favorite printmakers. They're being introduced by death, like a Katrina from Day of the Dead, which is a character from Posada, actually, in a bull rein from Goya. And that little character on the right is supposed to be myself as a kid with a Mexican mask on my roller skates. Anyway, I'm gonna keep moving. Another series from Goya is the Caprichos. And this is another one of my favorite prints. The Sleep of Reason produces monsters. Except that the monsters here, like the bats, the owls, the cats, are no longer scary. I mean, if anything, all these some of them are endangered species, like, if not all of them. I mean, the tigers are in danger, the owls are in danger. The bats even are in danger, and they're all good for the agriculture, for different things. So I decided to put actual scary things like stealth bombers, Tomahawk missiles, and so on. And the owl is just there being a companion to, is believed to be Goya, the artist himself, taking a nap. So anyway, so this is Jesse Helms and Jerry Falwell, and they're giving each other a pedicure, and they work a little too hard on. Do you remember Inky Winky, the purple one? Because they were horrified that children will be contaminated with Inky Winky. He was the purple gay Teletubby, and it's it was just one of those extreme politicians who hated artists. And thanks to Jesse Helms, we no longer have the NEA grants for artists, which I was lucky to benefit from. But anyway, this is the boogeyman is coming. It seems like times haven't changed that much. This was Fidel Castro dying. I made these ones in 1999, and Fidel Castro died like about 10 years later. So it's like, or even later than that. So he was dying forever. So, poor guy. Anyway, so that's the doctor. And I put the sign Monet on the communist style. I visited Cuba, and I was a little disappointed with the way they have like an apartheid of dollars and Cuban pesos and arresting people who have dollars. And anyways, but I'm not going to talk here about the Cuban Revolution. That will take me the rest of the lecture. So it's just a point in terms of how sometimes great ideals, great utopias become dystopian. Another one, the self-portrait of Goya, which I used to be a disclaimer because I don't pretend to be as good as him. So I made it had too big for me. So that's clearly not as good as Goya. So that's my disclaimer. Another big influence in my life and art is Lulu. She was the most willful cat we ever had, the smartest cat. Here you could see she's working on a self-portrait. She did a really good job. She was so willful. She will go in everywhere in the house. There was no place we used to have a saying like, good girls go to heaven, Lulu goes everywhere. And she was so willful here that was right after she was sentenced by a cardiologist to die. But my niece was here to save her. She communicated with Lulu, and Lulu said she was not ready to go, and she lived 2 more years, happily. So anyways, as I say, she was the most willful cat, and she will not die even if death was telling her to do so. She will not obey. So willful, she made it to one of my renderings. So that's Lulu. Here's like a little flying cat, or Develina, as we call her, with the same rendering of the sleep of reason produces monsters. Again, other monsters that maybe hunt us today. And this is like the portrait of a Mexican as a ratfink. I grew up with ratfink, was another character actually from Ed Roth, from the car culture. And I have 3D models with ratfink. I had all these rat with big teeth. I decided to make a Mexican version of this. This is kind of like the Holy Inquisition. It's not too different than rhetoric that we hear today from some places in Washington. Anyway, so I did pieces on the art market. This is after Damien Hirst dotted paintings. It's called Why Hide Them? It's about the speculators and art. And this one follows the same case with a Jeff Koons statue and kind of like a condom sculpture on the bottom. Anyway, so what a tailor can do is how police is militarized today against the pedophilia. You know how the church has abused children and nuns, and how they are so hypocritical. They are against same-sex marriage and so militant for family planning and birth control. So I decided to do some series of that. In fact, I'm going to talk about a work that really got me in trouble because I did more than that. Another one here with Joseph Stalin and Putin, but if I have done it today, I would have put a very different person instead of Stalin. You could guess who, his best buddy. On the bottom you could see the guitar, Pussycat, the rock and roll group of women who protested Putin for many years, and I really admire them. The economic crisis, the house is burning. So stereotypes going crazy, just getting rid of KKK chicken. They're going featherless. And this is like a virgin being chased by demons. Here it is again. It's Posada. I put another, it's a former President Obama with a KKK character, a chicken KKK on the bottom. This was in 2010, and there was already a big white protesting. Many white supremacists were already very militant against having an African American president, and I decided to do something about that too. So I did quite a few. Here when he's flirting with power, and I decided to do another forgery here after George Cruikshank, the headache, and here he's having a little bit of torture from Republicans and Democrats and maybe devils of his own creation, I don't know. But anyway, so more after Goya from the Proverbios. This is going to be about surveillance, how everything is being recorded through our phones right now, including myself. Hello, Apple. Anyway, and so on. So I'm going to move on from these series of works. They all address different issues like poaching of elephants and in more art market up and down. This is a bull market with another Jeff Koons. And these are little businessmen with women playing with them. These are Central American refugees, and I did a little train with a little child after having that La Bestia train that had a lot of children moving all the way through Mexico into the Southwest. Then I'm going to move to a very different series. These are big charcoal drawings, 7 feet by 7 feet. And I made this one back in 1984. And I did it during a national campaign organized by art critic Lucy Lippard against intervention in Central America. And I was happy to do sort of like an editorial cartoon. I didn't see this as art. To me, this was not art. This was an editorial cartoon. And I looked for the cheapest materials. I looked for just paper and charcoal. I spent maybe $10 doing the whole thing. I didn't think it was going to go beyond the exhibition and then a closet and people will forget about him. Then I put it in the show and people got so angry that somebody destroyed it. And I have to make a second version of it because you could see a little bit of a torn right on I don't know if you could see it. It's right on the face of Henry Kissinger on my side. You could see the torn of the paper. So I made a second replica, which is now in the collection of the San Jose Museum of Art, and they put it on and off, thankfully. So I did a whole series of different charcoal drawings like this one, and the slide is not backwards. That's the way it's in the original, Liberty backwards. That became a tapestry eventually, with quite a few dinosaurs. By the way, that's not Jesus, that's a representation of corruption of religion, and I'm going to talk more about it. Because that's just the way I do collage, by assembling images from different places. In this case, this one is called When Paradise Arrive. This one is another 80 by 80 inches at the collection of the Rosa. And in the middle finger, it's kind of hard to read, but it says English only. and this hand is about to flick this indigenous girl. This one is maybe, when I did it, this was done in 1987. I mean, I could have done it today again, but it's about migrations and places where people move back and forth and where everybody is from somewhere else. And I will talk more about this particular issue later in other works I have done recently. But in this case, it was about mostly about indigenous people who didn't immigrate to this country. They were here. As well as early Mexicans, when after the US-Mexican War, the early Mexicans didn't move to this country. This country moved to the Mexicans and the other way around. So that's kind of like an indirect commentary of many issues that I still keep dealing with in my work. So I'll go back to that. These are other ways in which immigrants moved to the US. These are Cubans that made a GM truck amphibious, and with the same engine. The truck went all the way from Havana to Miami, got stopped by the Coast Guard and sunk, and they were sent back several times. I made tributes to their genius, how they did that. These people should have been working for GM, if anything, because we're going to need amphibious trucks very soon, especially in places like San Francisco or Miami, a place that the ocean levels are going to move up very soon. This was their second attempt. This was a Lincoln. And about 13 people were inside, and the same thing happened. They were stopped by the Coast Guard and were sent back to Cuba again. So I did several tributes to them. This is one of them. Don't follow me, I'm lost too. That's a bumper sticker I saw in Mexico in the buses. And another one. The third time was a charm. They made it. That was the third card. I would like to have a card like this, and then, go to Cuba or back. So I did another painting celebrating the achievement. So, I mean, people who are so ingenious and so willing to risk their lives are just, for me, they are the contemporary pilgrims, if anything. And I decided to paint some pilgrims with Native Americans in that painting. The artists head north with their captives. Oh, where is my husband? The artist must have painted him. So, all this brings my ideas of appropriation in other ways. I mean, here is Andy Warhol, who had a big legal fight with Campbell's for just replicating Campbell's, and eventually he won against Campbell's because he considered that like a landscape that, as an artist, he was just portraying in the marketplace. So he won, and I decided to do another Andy Warhol cannibalism. So I did my version of it. Instead of Campbell's, I put cannibals soup, and I guess you might be able to read all these artist brains with rice, cream of dealer, art historian alphabet, fundraisers adobo, museum director stripe, models meat, anthropologists with noodle, collectors broth, curators liver, and critics tongue, my favorite. All of them have recipes in the back. This one is a quick meal in 5 minutes, anthropologists with noodles and your favorite sandwich. A quick and simple meal that's fun to eat. Add a delicious bowl of America's favorite anthropologists with noodle soup with lots of yummy noodles to your favorite sandwich. Eating anthropologists is so much fun, you are sure to smile. So this is what triggered something what I call my reverse anthropology concept. And I did it with the economy in 2009 after the collapse of the economy. So this is Wall Street gumbo, all-American treasury with pork, Freddy mac and cheese, mergers, acquisitions, and lentils, executive bonus consomme, Action House chili, stimulus minestrone, Ponzi chowder, and this is mortgage broken stew, and bailout bisque. This one is called pyramid scheme. And I hope I don't have to do another one soon. That's the scary part. And this one I decided to infiltrate a Mexican in the dollar bill. So you might not see it here, but it's right here. It's just a stereotype. But it's to pay tribute about the way many hardworking people play in the economy of this country. Not only Mexicans, but in this case was the most available stereotype I found. I have done electronic. This is the influence of my father again, making money. Everything is changed in this dollar. The name, the title is Federal Bailout Note, and it's the untied States of America, and so on. And let me just enlarge some of the small text that that you could see. All right, so this note is a legal reminder for all debts, public and private. This is the public debt, $22 trillion so far. It's there's Washington, sink underwater, and this is the share of debt per person, $66,000, 943. Anyway, so it's one of the most nerve-wracking pieces I have done. I don't even look at it when I have it at home. But I decided to make $1 billion bill because we might start needing something with devaluations and whatnot. And then also we did. We changed the text. This is how many billionaires in the per capita are. Only 540 out of 324 million people, something like that. Offshore tax-free, it's like a lot of money there. And then in this case, we put this note should not be legal tender for corporations only. We have Washington as a Wall Street character. The title was the Unequal States of America, Federal Economic Privilege Note, and so on. So we have the back, same thing. It says in tax loopholes we trust. Anyways, I began to do other appropriations of other works. In this case, a painting by Charles Weimar, The Abduction of Daniel Boone's Daughter by the Indians from 1853. So I decided to reverse the stereotypes here in the original Border Patrol. I'm making a new version now as a print, but instead of Daniel Boone's daughter, I'm gonna put Donald Duck on her head. And instead of the stereotype of the indigenous face, I'm gonna put actual sculptures from the Northwest and maybe a Mayan head on the other, so still work in progress. Other piece I did is an appropriation by James Ensor, a painting by James Ensor. And this one is called A Murder. And in mine, I decided to put an indigenous character whose head is being replaced by a European face. Let me just look. It's right here. Let's see if we could see it. Hopefully, it's barely, but you see. I have another painting representing that. Two of my cats have to, one of my cats, a different cat, this is Diego and Frida. We cursed him because Diego got big and Frida was in the hospital very often. But anyway, I put Diego in the next version I did of the same painting. This one is more clear. You can see the head transplant. And in French it reads, "Devils to torture me." And I don't know if you could see a little bit like invisible figures, but it's Bill O'Reilly, Lou Dobbs, Rush Limbaugh, and Ann Coulter on the right. Yeah, I know, scary people. Anyway, another one. I appropriate paintings that I like, art that I like. I really like George Bingham, the Jolly Rafters. But I changed it just to represent different immigrants from different parts of the world that in this case might be crossing the Rio Grande or the Rio Bravo, they call it Mexico. And I decided to put a stereotype of a Mexican, but without the skin, just to show that underneath the stereotype there is a real human being. But they're happy and they're mixing very well with everybody, just sharing the time and space in this painting very happily, living with each other. Same thing in a print that I did, the pastoral or Arcadian state. So I had a bike accident at some point. I did this print. Let me see if I could enlarge a little bit the bottom. It's really hard to see it. But anyway, so this little character is running away from the Lone Ranger, a KKK, and the Border Patrol, jumps over an obstacle, collapses, gets taken by the Red Cross, gets into the hospital, gets a little chicken of Guadalupe, gets better, and finally escapes. It's what I thought after I was healing from a concussion I had in my bike. I got better, thankfully. But this is a close-up of the text, so you could read this very brainy. That's actually more like that. That's why the title is "Illegal Aliens Guide to Critical Theory." Is this character is very critical and speaks art. Speaking of, I'm gonna talk a little bit. Why do I deal with all these issues? I have recently gotten my DNA. I don't know if you have ever tried getting your, you know, what kind of DNA history you have on one of those 23andMe or Ancestry. But I got mine recently, and I happen to be 50% Native American, about 38% Southern Iberian, about 1% or half% from everywhere in the world, like Jewish, Ashkenazi, Jewish, and also Arab, as well as Northern African, and South Asian, East Asian, and I realized that my ancestors were very promiscuous. And but also I did self-portraits you're going to see coming up in a little while, where I present myself as my DNA basically, and this was done before I did my DNA. What I thought about was that it's very interesting to see how we probably all of us have DNA very mixed from different parts of the world, and our genes live along with each other very happily. If they didn't, we'll be dead. We'll have a civil war in our war. Very often I wonder how the history of DNA is probably the history of humankind. How we move borders from Central Africa all the way to Northern Europe, all the way to the Americas. Just like the Homo sapiens got mixed with the Neanderthals, and they both got mixed with the denizens in Asia. All of that's happening, so okay. But it's interesting to me how, since we all have a very similar history of migration, since ancient times, there is no ethnic purity anymore. How people are still very divided. And sometimes what I feel is like there is a division of civilization versus barbarism, which is coming from even since the conquest. In this case, this is how Belgian artists used to represent Brazilian women in the Amazons. The Belgian artist was Theodore de Brie, and he traveled throughout the Americas, and sometimes he described even mermaids in some places, so that tells you how accurate he might have been. He might have seen manatees at some point. But anyway, so this idea of civilization versus barbarism comes back from the Greeks. Everything outside of Greece was barbarian. Then eventually the Europeans adopted that in all the places they conquered, like the Americas, Africa, Asia. So civilization and barbarism was very much behind this. So I decided to take the role of the stereotype and made this other version of civilization and barbarism. This one is called The President Xenophobic Nightmare in a Foreign Language. And in Russian, on the top, if you read any Russian by any chance, I'll translate it. It reads, "I want to wake up in this moment." And on the top say, "And the women will take the tribe." Nasty women. On the lower left is Christopher Columbus, and then the Border Patrol on the right. And the moms have all kinds of stereotypes as babies, like a Mexican bandit, etc. So I'm going to move on to my codices. This is, I admire the art done by pre-Columbian cultures and immediately after the conquest by indigenous artists. In this case, an anonymous indigenous artist portrays how the Spanish priests and soldiers were executing indigenous leaders who refused to become Christianized. And not only did they that, they also burned the books. This is the burning of their books. You might see a little character on the right corner with books, with codices. And the largest library of the continent was done in Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl. Remember that little newspaper I was showing in the beginning? That's the same. It used to be like the Athens of the Aztec kingdom. And it was run by King Nezahualcóyotl. King Nezahualcóyotl means in Nahua, the hungry coyote. And he was against human sacrifice, among other things. It's something that you never, hardly ever hear. At the peak of the Aztec Empire, there was a poet king who was an architect, who built the biggest library in the continent, who organized poetry festivals, King Nezahualcóyotl, who decided that human sacrifice was not necessary, and instead he sacrificed small animals. And but by today's standard, that's not nice either. But still, he was a very enlightened character. Thankfully for him, he died just a few years before Columbus arrived to the Americas, so he never saw the destruction of his library. And you know, that library is described by one of the Aztec survivors of the conquest as a library that hosted thousands of books that were piled up in a bonfire, and there was a mass suicide when the indigenous people saw their library being burned. The Spanish soldiers and priests could not stop the Indians from hanging themselves or jumping off pyramids or killing any way they could. Was a major tragedy. That history left an impression on me. I began to do works like this one with pre-Columbian characters and sort of like an icon of Coca-Cola on the other side. So this is like Quetzalcoatl, maybe, a mix of characters. And so all that combined with other influences like Superman in Spanish, in this case. I grew up reading every American comic was translated in Spanish, like this one. You could see some of the pages. And I loved it. I even asked for Christmas presents. We didn't ask Santa Claus, but the three Reyes Magos, the three kings, for our presents. And I asked to the kings, please give me a suit of Superman so I could fly from the roof of my house. My parents never bought it. Anyway, so that and Superman is what you see in the exhibition here, crossing. And again, this is about, in this case, alien from out of space, because Superman comes from Krypton. But when you think about who were the first undocumented immigrants to this country, they were the Spanish conquistadors, which were all the way up to Chesapeake Bay in the north, about almost 100 years before the Pilgrims arrived. and they crossed from east to the west of the continent. But they were undocumented, just like the pilgrims, and they were acting against the law of the land. They didn't have passports, and then they created new laws. And to me, the contemporary immigration is maybe not too different. Again, there are people who might be criminals crossing the border. They could be drug dealers, etc. But for the most part, there's people who are willing to give their lives to just find a better life here, as maybe economic refugees or political refugees as well. So to me, the contemporary immigration is like the contemporary pilgrims in that sense. And I celebrate them basically in my work. And sometimes I just like to make satires of the absurdity of having such a tribal distinctions between different groups. But anyway, Superman in my work became one of the symbols that became, and this is the king Nezahualcóyotl I was talking to you about, the poet king. So I decided to put together these two heroes facing each other in a painting. This is in the collection of the LACMA, the LA County Museum of Art in Los Angeles. And I decided to use all kinds of symbolic elements, like a constructivist painting on the upper right corner, and so on. But anyway, as I say, I have quite a bit of works, and this is Wonder Woman. I did another page with her and Superman and King Nezahualcóyotl in a Codex Spangliensis that I did with Guillermo Gómez Peña. So I'd include them. Having fun here with King Nezahualcóyotl again. And Superman in another of the pages of my book he's on the last page here. You could see him, and yeah, you can see him on the top. So I could scroll the whole thing. Anyway, I have done quite a bit of codices, but none has given me more trouble than this one. This is the Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals. And I made this book back in 2002 when the first news of the priests molesting children made a big scandal in the Boston Globe. So I decided to make something that I thought with humor to satirize the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church, again, because they haven't done anything about the pedophilia, hardly beyond just declarations. And also, nuns were victims of many priests. So I decided to play a little bit the corruption of something spiritual. And by that corruption, I did like these characters, which are a mix of soft porn magazines that you could find in Mexico City and religious icons. But the pages that people had heart attacks with was this one here. And there is no nudity. If you really think about it, I mean, the image is very provocative, but there's no nudity, nobody's touching anything. Okay, so Fox News, say, Stanford professor shows Jesus having oral sex. I did not even think that. I mean, it did not even occur to me. Somebody had that mind. I would like to see that, anybody trying to paint that. And by the way, there are Renaissance paintings with Jesus actually having with genitalia very exposed. Anyway, so it will be interesting to see just a slideshow of that. There was a book actually by Leo Steinberg, The Sexuality of Christ in Renaissance Art and Modern Oblivion. But anyways, this is not Jesus. Anyway, this is a collage again. And right here, this is also Jesus, but represented in a book, a Persian book. But he looks Persian as well. So, but anyway, after the Fox News show, people went crazy. And this was an exhibition in Loveland, the Loveland Museum. And I began to get hate mail. A pastor in that town asked me, why did I do it? That his congregation wanted him to join the picket line. And I told the pastor, well, I did it for what I told you, because the church hasn't done anything about the pedophilia of the church. I have known people who had been abused. And also because I have many friends. I have gone to gay weddings, beautiful. I have friends, neighbors, colleagues, students of mine who are transgender, or to me it's about love. They love each other, and I don't understand when people get angry about anybody's differences. So I felt like I needed to do that book somehow. So I decided to do it, and I explained that to the pastor. And the pastor wrote back to me and said, thank you for your thoughtful explanation. If you ever come to Loveland, it would be an honor to meet you. Wow, I wrote back to him, and we became instant friends. But then he began to have threats, and his house was put online. People were invited to attack his house. Anyways, to make the story short, one lady drove all the way from Montana to Colorado, 18-wheeler truck. She was a truck driver, and with a crowbar, walking to the museum, broke the plexiglass and destroyed the book. The poor woman didn't know this was a print, and I have 40 copies of the same print. So she didn't need to drive all the way from Montana to Colorado. She could have just changed the channel. She didn't like what Fox News was showing. And the only thing she did was the price of my other 39 copies went up. Anyway, so the story gets better. The same people who boycotted my show in Colorado boycotted an exhibition in Washington, D.C. About art from same-sex artists, the hide and seek. And this group protested the work of David von Aerobics because he had a video with ants crawling into a crucifix. And the Smithsonian Museum took that work down right away, but it backfired because suddenly that video was all over the city, in front windows, etc. In Colorado, the curator stood her ground and didn't put down other works of mine that were in the show. But Washington was a bigger fish for this group, so they forgot about us, thankfully. So I say, thank you, David von Aerobics. You took these crazy people away from us. And then the pastor and I calmed down and we became friends. And one day the pastor asked me, hey, Enrique, will you do a Jesus painting for my church? And I thought, wow, I don't know what to tell him, but I'm not religious. So I told him, I'm not religious, but he risked his life defending my work. But if your congregation accepts a painting from me, I'll be happy to do it for free. And he read our letters to his congregation, and the congregation accepted it. Even though I told him, nobody knows how Jesus looked like. This is pictures of Jesus from different cultures, like there's Korean, Haitian, Native American, this Hungarian, Mexican. They all look like the people who painted them. This Ethiopian that looks very African, and of course the European on the bottom. So I told him, I'm just going to do my own version of that. And he said, I said, no problem. So okay. So I had to do it, and I did it. So this is the painting I did. So I wrote with big letters "love" on the banner, just to remind people that Jesus was about love, not about hate. And I looked for paintings in Mexican Baroque paintings of Jesus, as well as Dutch. I did a mix of them. And I put the word love, and then before I finished the painting, I sent an image to the pastor, because I was afraid they wouldn't like me putting something like love there, because it sounds like a political statement. But they loved it. And the pastor said there is a passage in the Bible that says that Jesus had the banner of love over humanity, and it was perfect for his congregation. It's an evangelist congregation of 3,000 people, and it's called the Resurrection Fellowship. So the resurrection was perfect for the pastor is Jonathan Wiggins, and until today we are very good friends. The thing kept going. After they ship the painting, they pay for the shipping, they put it high up in a building so nobody will vandalize it. And then they asked me to go there for a reception, for an opening. Then I got really afraid. I didn't want to go. I think in Colorado, like in many places, I mean, there's, Columbine happened there, or that shooting in a theater in a Batman movie, people get shot for less. I thought we're going to be twofers there, the pastor and me together, with people protesting him. I was really, really afraid of going. But I went. I went by myself. I did not even come with my wife or the publisher of the print. I didn't want to risk anybody. And it was beautiful. Nobody threatened me. They put actually bodyguards on my side. I feel like a rock star or something. But nobody talked to me about Jesus. Nobody tried to convert me. I was just happy to meet the pastor's families. I got out of my art bubble, and the pastor got out of his church bubble. And then the museum and the director, Susan Eison, and the Loveland Museum got so much support from their constituency. They got a lot of money to the point that they opened a printmaking classroom with an etching press, and until today they teach printmaking classes. So it was a very happy ending at the end, and the hate letters were replaced by love letters. So it was one of the most happy experiences I have, creating a dialogue I was not even expecting to create with one of my works. So anyway, so I have done quite a few other codices in that format, like this one here, with including a rat fink on the lower left corner. But I have done some about border walls, like in this case. This one I did a couple of years ago. And you could see an enlargement of it. With Philip Guston here, a little Picasso painting, paintings from different places. And stereotypes, ethnic stereotypes right here all across the border. And I decided to paint people without the eyes because it's like borders don't let people show each other as they are. And it's kind of very symbolic of being very close and very far away. And so I have similar ideas in different books. So I'm gonna move just a little fast because I really have quite a few images. These are all appropriations of modernist paintings with an Ellsworth Skelly cube on the left, then Roy Lichtenstein, and you recognize Van Gogh and a stereotype in the background. This one, Illegal Aliens Guide to Macroeconomic Theory. Other appropriation I've done is Giverny. I live in Giverny for about 3 months, and that was one of the best times I have had in my career. But the little devil in me couldn't help me, and decided to paint portrait of Picasso, self-portrait of Picasso. It's not Picasso, okay? It's a painting of Picasso and a painting of a sculpture. And in French on the top, I wrote, "Time could pass fast or slowly." And I decided to do sort of like reverse modernism in this case. You know, Picasso appropriated African sculptures because he loved African sculptures and developed his Cubist style from the African sculptures. The same thing with people like Henry Moore, who appropriated Aztec sculptures to develop his seated figures, or people like Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, who appropriated Mayan architecture to develop some of his houses in Los Angeles, and so on. So I thought, what will happen if you know, an artist from a former colony decided to appropriate European art with the same admiration as the modernists had for the cultures they were appropriating from former colonies. So I decided to do this kind of work, and I have done quite a few versions of Giverny. This one with a canoe from Xochimilco, and the shooting of Maximilian right in the middle. I'm sorry, this is another version. And this is a close-up with the Maximilian. But anyway, I have done several after Giverny. This is the collapse of the art market after the collapse of the economy. Although the art market didn't suffer that much, I have to say. This book I found in the flea market in Mexico City, and I have used it as a resource for many works, and this is where the portrait of my DNA came about, without me knowing yet the results of my DNA test. So anyway, so this is called Aliens Sans Frontiers, and it's a self-portrait has different stereotypes, like like a Russian character, Arab, African lady, a Chinese lady, and a Brazilian lady. So I have done quite a few of those. Illegal Aliens Guide to Mindfulness, because I practice meditation sometimes, and so can I follow that? That's a single piece that way. A close-up of the same. Mindful Savage Guide to Reverse Anthropology, once again. So just basically how my genes came about, and everybody lives happy in this mix of cultures. Eventually, I did very painterly elements. This one is in the collection of the Academy in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. So it's a hand-painted one. So this one has glass eyes. I don't know if you could see them, but let me see if I have other shots that might be more like a close-ups. Like this is another one, and so I'm going to actually show the next one. Yeah, here. So you can see how thick the paint is. So it's a process that I quite enjoy. And these little glass eyes are the ones they use in Mexico for saints, but I found them on an art supply store. So I keep basically doing something similar with all of these pieces. Anyway, maybe I should show this last one. This is the daguerreotypical codex, and it's called Caníbales Daguerreotípicos. And you can see Picasso with one of his wives here, but they have African masks. It's a little hard to see, but this one is Joseph Beuys as a Native American. And this one is Frank Lloyd Wright designing a Mexican monument, which he never did, anyway. Jacques, what's his name? This French poet, his name skips to me, with Yves Saint Laurent. I get confused with Jacques Cousteau, but it's not Jacques Cousteau. I'm so sorry. I'll remember his name. Anyway, so this is a statue by Henry Moore with the Aztec mask that was on the statue here, and Henry Moore's head was there, so I put the Aztec mask. Anyways, the surrealists used to say that ancient cultures were the primitive cultures that they call, were like the childhood of humanity. And I decided to be the child of humanity now playing with the surrealists. It's hard to see here, but this is André Breton with some Mexican dwarf revolutionaries on the side, and Coatlicue with Yves Saint Laurent dress. I'm just gonna move into a little closer one. This is a photograph by Edward Curtis, which is part of that codex, but I included other things like an ad for iPad, and this one is a Cartier-Bresson photograph running along. So it's again the reverse modernism. This the Yves Saint Laurent dresses. These dresses cost as much as a painting by Mondrian, about $3,000 at the time, and that was as much, according to an art historian at school, that's as much as Mondrian got for one of his paintings. So this was an appropriation of a painter into fashion. So I did my appropriation from the appropriation. And another one that I found, and I decided to make a version, the opposite of the opposite of meditation. When you meditate, it's like you are here and now, listening to sound, you're breathing, etc. This is the opposite, somewhere yesterday. And I'm gonna almost finish here the email with some of my recent paintings from the last 10 months, basically, Goyas. In the original Goya print, the witches were kind of evil. In mine, they are good. They're good witches. They're saving these people from being killed. And I also used glass, right here, this little bit of glass eyes. And I decided to do a little advertising for hemorrhoid medicine. So I made my version of a hemorrhoid. So any resemblance to any hemorrhoid here, it's pure coincidence. And it's just a pain in the butt. But this is in New York. Actually, I had it in my last exhibition. I don't think anybody's gonna buy it, but I might end up getting it back, and I'll happily put it in my bathroom for inspiration. But anyway, another appropriation I did after James Ensor is this one. It's called Millionaires and Billionaires. The millionaires are these little people here, and the golf player. These are the billionaires. They have the big bite of the stick here. And this one is just blowing up of stereotypes at the end. Again, with glass eyes here and everywhere. I did a print, the same, is everybody is an alienígena. And it's basically the same idea I was telling you. We are the same genome, all of us, and it's just sad that we are divided so much in tribal, useless divisions. Anyway, another painting, The Ambassadors by Holbein, and this elongated skull is what attracted me. I saw it in London about 2 years ago, and I took pictures of it, and I made my own version of that elongated skull after the hurricane that destroyed Puerto Rico. So this is after the hurricane. That's the painting. When you see it from the side, this is what you see, the three-dimensional skull coming out of the painting. And finally, my last few paintings. I'm working right now on this. These are works in progress. This is the 7 capital scenes. And I think I'm gonna cover more the faces with more stuff. But this one is Greed. And this is a detail from that. And this one is called Pride. And it's a little Snow White on the bottom, just a portrait of white supremacism, basically. And this one is Sloth, or Laziness. I still have to paint a television with the Fox News channel on the bottom, and I still have to add color, but I couldn't wait to show this already. And I'm tired of painting the face of the president, so I'm beginning to replace him by Donald Duck. That way I don't have to think about it. And lastly, I've been doing this homage to these little kids from the border with their mom. This is a very touching photograph, basically following the civil rights movement, the I Am a Man demonstrations of African Americans. And this one is I Am a Child. But going back to the idea of the genome, and how we're all the same species. I wonder if you could read it. I wrote with silver, because they've been giving these silvery blankets to all these kids. I decided to write with silver, I am you, and we are them as well. And this one is the capital scene called ire, or anger. Finally, I wanted to paint something, paint something a little more optimistic. And this was the Women's March in Washington, D.C., right after the inauguration of the current president. And I wanted to end with a hopeful image of people joining each other in the same place. One of the things that inspire me the most is, like, in times when things are very painful and difficult, sometimes you find the best of people. Like, for instance, when there were other hate crimes that happened, or terrorism that happened, like in Texas, here in Victoria, when that mosque was burned a few years ago. Right there in the same town, after the mosque was totally destroyed, a local synagogue offered the synagogue for the Muslims to go worship at the synagogue. And I felt that was a really beautiful story of collaboration, something that doesn't even happen in the war that is happening in between the Palestinians and Israel, which is very tragic. But here in this place in Victoria, in Texas, Muslims and Jewish were happy to embrace each other. Well, a few weeks later, if you recall, near St. Louis, the Jewish cemetery was vandalized. And the same Muslims who were supported by the Jewish people before began to do a fundraising to get money to repair the gravestones of the Jewish cemetery. And they got more money than they asked for. That's what really inspired my work and what inspired me to keep going. Just the fact that just like our genes could live with each other, actually people in difficult times, in somber times, could embrace each other and live with each other. And with that, I end my talk. Thank you for such a long listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I went a little over. Sorry. So maybe we could spend about 10 minutes with questions. Okay. Yes.
Okay, long ago, I think at the time of your MFA show, you said that your large pastel drawings are so personal that you wouldn't know what to do if somebody wanted to buy one. So
right.
The question is, do you have any that you've retained that you felt were too personal or too valuable to sell?
I have actually one that I didn't even show here. I have one that is not personal, but it's so nasty that I don't think anybody's gonna ever buy. It's I don't know if you saw the exhibition in Los Angeles, How to Read El Pato Pascual. It was an exhibition about Disney in Latin America. And I had an image that comes from a massacre in El Salvador, where people decapitated a family. And in front of that decapitation, I have a Donald Duck just walking in front of it. That was in the exhibition at the Pacific Standard Time at the museum at the California State University in Los Angeles. That was curated by Ruben Ortiz. And that's still in my collection, but I would not even put it myself in my own house. so I make art that I probably won't be able to even look at myself, so I don't think it becomes a commodity very easily or ever. It might have to be maybe in a Holocaust museum or something like that, and I'll give it for free or something, but I guess most of my favorite works are gone, unfortunately. That's the first things that people want to buy. So, and I need to make a living, and I make a trade that way. Thankfully, some of them end up in public collections like this museum or other museums. So that's the best outcome. But I have few works too, still. But I'm trying to keep at least one of my codices, and I hope I'll get one back. So we'll see. I'll let you know. Anyway, so who else might have a question or comments, whatever? Yes, Suzanne.
Thank you. That was a great lecture. Very generous. And I'm just taken though by how you distill such a formal acumen as well as politics and work that will stand up over time. I mean, you're an incredible painter and draftsman. But the question I have is that, I mean, kind of your humor belies a rigorous, dedicated researcher. I mean, that is part of your work, right? But it also, your research would put a shame to a lot of art historians. So how do you go about doing your research?
Well, I like to read history, especially topics that interest me, like the destruction of the pre-Columbian books, for instance. But also the sense of humor is something that comes from cultural, I didn't speak about it, but the cultural backgrounds. In general, people in Mexico had a sense of humor that is very defiant of death. And sometimes you're about to get killed and somebody cracks a joke and still laugh before you get killed. But it's, you know, like the earthquakes. It is like some of the most catastrophic earthquakes. And some of the funniest jokes I ever heard were from the earthquake that killed about 30,000 people back in the mid-'80s in Mexico City. And I couldn't talk to my family. I was living in Berkeley. And I was very worried about it. And the first time I talked to them 2 weeks later on the phone, the first thing they were telling me, there were jokes after jokes after jokes. They had one of like Plácido Domingo. Plácido Domingo is a Spanish refugee child who went to Mexico with his parents on a boat, was adopted by a Mexican family. And I mean, he's a great opera singer and famous worldwide, and people love him in Mexico. Well, he went to Mexico City to help. And one of the jokes my sisters told me was that they changed the name of Plácido Domingo. And Plácido Domingo, if you think of his name in Spanish, is Pleasant Sunday. So I say, what's his name now? It's Pinche Jueves, which is, how could I translate that? Is Bitching Thursday instead. And even people we love cannot escape. And in my family, I mean, I have several family members who could testify to that. There are little wars, like bullying each other since you were like a little kid. One day, my brother-in-law was bullying with a younger kid, with Julian, exchanging insults. You look like a car crash, and you look like, I mean, they will think of very funny names, like you look like an extraterrestrial bacteria, and you look like this, like that. Eventually, the little kid, Julian was maybe like 4 years, 5 years, he said, well, you look like a painting of my tío Enrique. You look like a painting of my uncle. He won. He won. Can't get worse than that. So that's my family. And if you got mad and cried, you lost. And so you develop like a thick skin, but sometimes I have to be very careful not to offend my friends. I have offended more than one friend when I suddenly, my mouth opened and like a snake came out without me controlling it. And then I regretted, I had to apologize, and eventually they forgive me. But among my best friends, we sometimes make laugh each other with just nasty jokes. Now, in San Francisco, that sense of humor about earthquakes would have been really, really bad taste. And even the last earthquake in Mexico City, I noticed it was a little change in the culture. It was maybe a little more scary. I hear less jokes about it. So cultures change. But when I grew up, that was the law of the land. You have to laugh about nastiness. And it's maybe based on the idea that is also very pre-Columbian, that life is a dream, and when you die, you wake up. That's what's in pre-Columbian poetry. And in that sense, it's hard to take anything too serious. You love life, of course, and you love people even when they are gone. But when you die, your life begins. It's eternity has more lifetime. I'm not religious again, but I love the mythology of that concept. So, but that is embedded in the sense of humor. It's still there, and that's where it's come from. So I hope I answered my question with such a long response. Anyways, one more. Yes.
Tiene que ser de alguien de la ciudad.
Ah, perfecto.
Okay. My question is, as a Mexican, are you a national? Did you nationalize as an American?
Yes, I became an American citizen in 2000. And
with all the political issues that you have touched, and they're quite a lot, are you still persecuted or not?
Well, I have to be very cautious because the context is what matters. The same work I had destroyed in Colorado, for instance, was totally invisible in San Francisco. In San Francisco, nobody cared. But you put it in a museum, more in a rural area, and it's a different context. So, but even Washington, D.C., I was surprised about the boycott of Hide and Seek, that exhibition. That was terrible. But context is very interesting, that the way persecution, I don't take freedom for granted anytime. I mean, you have to fight for it, defend it. We were just talking at lunchtime, San Francisco now is facing a destruction of a mural of somebody who worked with Diego Rivera in Mexico City as well as in San Francisco. It was Victor Arnatov. Victor Arnatov also was persecuted by McCarthy. He was interrogated by the Anti-American Activities Committee because of his portrayal of Richard Nixon as a rat or something like that. Now, the San Francisco Board of Education is basically have decided to destroy the mural because it portrayed slavery at the times of Washington. Washington is in the mural, but also there is somebody stepping on a Native American. And the only point of the artist was to critique George Washington as a slavist and somebody who was committing crimes against Native Americans. That was it. But somebody was crying, oh, my child cannot look at this. I want to destroy. The Board of Education voted, they're so politically correct, let's destroy it. And I signed a letter protesting it, asking them, with hundreds of people, artists and art historians, protesting their decision and hoping that they will reconsider the destruction, because it will be just like the Cultural Revolution in China. It's also coming from the government, from the city government, censoring leftists against leftists, basically. And that's the part where, I mean, all of us could be persecuted even if I live in a liberal place like San Francisco. But things change, thankfully, slowly but surely. I want to be more optimistic than pessimistic. And there's a way to move away from dystopia, slowly but surely. And I hope if we don't, we're just going to go extinct, basically, because those are the alternatives. We are not going to change out of ideologies, we're going to change out of necessity. We have to be just pragmatic. Otherwise, we're going to join the dinosaurs in the extinct species, and the planet has no patience for us. I mean, we could deny climate change, we could deny anything that is happening, extinction of a species. The planet is merciless if we don't help, if we don't become one with the planet, and instead of trying to exploit it and exploit people and to the end, to the last of the resources. That's the part where I think art could play a role and create at least dialogue and a sense of hope that is happening. Like this artist who did the seesaw in the border. I just invited him to come talk at Stanford, and he's coming. And that's a beautiful example of how people could enjoy each other in both sides of the border. It's a really he has a TED talk, which is really amazing, about how people actually were catapulted from one side of the border to the other in a circus act, and he shows the vintage footage. He was an American who was one of those cannonballs and threw the border fence and was landed on a net in the American side. And he has vintage footage like that on and on and on. And then he presents his projects of what to do about people in both sides of the border, you know, having fun with each other, laughing with each other. That's the part that really inspires me. That's the part that gives me hope. And I hope I answered your question about persecution, though. Yes, on and off, not as much as here. But yes, I had an exhibition of my prints at the Museo Nacional de la Estampa about a couple of years ago, and in Oaxaca City at the Institute of Contemporary, the IAGO, Instituto de Artes Gráficas de Oaxaca, the one that Francisco Toledo runs. And those are the only few times that I have shown in Mexico. I guess nobody's a prophet in his or her hometown, and that proves that to me. But I love it when I have a chance to show in Mexico. Well, thank you for your questions, and thank you everybody for being here. Thanks a lot. And thank you for having me in this exhibition. I really love this exhibition. I hope everybody does. Thanks.